Hey Danielle, I'm getting ready for a judging rally and I need your help. I know there's lots of information in this judging manual, but it's really hard to understand and find where it is.
Judging does take a lot of practice, but the main thing to remember is that it's all about thinking critically, with making decisions and comparing animals. Once you have those down, judging gets a lot easier. Welcome to the Comparative Clinic. Today, we're going to practice some judging. Our class today is toilet paper, but before we begin that, let's go over some basics. First, you might be asking yourselves, why do we judge? Well, we can learn a lot from judging. It helps us to practice critical thinking, and we develop our decision-making skills. As well, we learn how to effectively communicate through oral and written reasons, and it helps to develop confidence in yourself. There are also some benefits to judging. You learn how to organize your thoughts and express yourself in a convincing manner. You also can become more comfortable with different terminology, and you can practice pronouncing words clearly. Finally, you learn how to defend your decisions. There are some basics to judging that we'll go through. Number 1, be aware of the specific details of the class. For example, if it's a market class versus a breeding class, you'll be looking at different things when you're judging. It's important to go through the criteria in order to determine what's different. Another example is if you're judging light horse versus heavy horse. Secondly, it's important to mentally review the criteria before you start judging the class. Another example, if you're judging a market class, you'll probably be judging the loin, but the eyes and ears of the animal are not important. These are the kind of things that you need to go through before you start judging the class. Also, it's important to use the correct terminology for that class. Lastly, you want to make sure that you always rank the animals using the specific criteria that has already been put out. If you need to, write yourself some notes on the side when you're judging the class in order to remember why you ranked the animals the way you did. Here, I have a sample of a standard 4-H judging card. For the introduction, at your judging rally, you'll be given instructions whether to fill in your own name in your club or an entry number that will be given to you. It's really important to remember to fill in the class, however, so that you know which class you're going to and that the judge understands that you know what you're judging. Then, moving on, we have the top, middle, and bottom pairs. So we have the top and the middle in the front, and the bottom pair is on the back. The last written section is for your last place. You want to make sure to include a grant in this placing. And it's really important to remember to put your concluding statement. These are my reasons for placing this class of blank and whatever you place them. Now, the most important thing to remember when you're judging is that you must compare your reasons. To do this, you need to be comparing a pair within the class. Just describing the individual animals or items in the class will not help you receive any marks. It must always be a pair. In order to make sure that you are comparing the animals or items, there are a few words that can help indicate whether you're doing this or not. These words end usually with an E and an R. For example, greater, longer, larger, straighter, and smoother. If you're using those terminology, you're probably comparing the right way. Also, remember that you need to use accurate terminology and relevant comparisons for the class. There are some things to remember when you're judging. You always want to put 3 or 4 reasons per pair, and as well, the differences between the animals should be ranked in the order of strongest reason at the beginning. You usually want to put your grants at the end and are not necessary for every pair. Don't forget, neatness and spelling do count. And don't forget that concluding statement. Now on to today's class, toilet paper. Now we do have a criteria that we should stick to. It includes the following. How soft, thick, and gentle is the toilet paper? What is its color? Is it appealing? What is the ease of usage? Are the sheets individually perforated or not? How much paper is on each roll, and what is the convenience? What is the absorbency and texture? And is it safe for sewers and septic tanks? Using that criteria, we're going to judge the following class. I'll describe the samples to you. This sample has perforated sheets, it's really soft, and is nice, bright, and white. Our second sample is not as thick, although the sheets are perforated, but you can see light through them more than the first sample. Our third sample is off of a big roll, and it's not perforated. And our last sample is paper towel. We have completed a judging card for you to look at. These are my reasons for placing this class of toilet paper 1, 2, 3, and 4. I place number 1 over number 2 because number 1 is a thicker sample than number 2 as it is double ply versus single. Number 1 is more visually appealing because it is a brighter, whiter color than number 2. And the double size roll of number 1 will last longer and is more convenient than number 2. I place number 2 over number 3 because number 2 has a softer texture than number 3. Number 2 is also a brighter color than number 3. I do grant that the large roll of number 3 would be convenient. However, number 2 would be easiest to use due to the perforated sheets. I place number 3 over number 4 because number 3 is more user-friendly because it's in the roll than number 4. Number 3 is more gentle product than number 4, and number 3 is more biodegradable than number 4. Number 3 is also a much more appealing color and texture than number 4. And I place number 4 last because number 4 has a rough texture, an unappealing color, and is inconvenient to store. Number 4 is in an awkward shape and composition and should not actually be used as toilet paper except in emergency situations. Number 4 is also not appropriate for use in sewer and septic systems. These are my reasons for placing this class of toilet paper 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now for the final reminders. Spelling and terminology count. Also remember to print neatly. Avoid nondescript terms like nice and good. And break the class into pairs for your comparisons. Remember to use those comparison words for every reason. And good luck to all of your judging classes.
Danielle. After learning all this stuff about comparative terms, it was so much easier to judge at the judging rally.
That's good to hear, Brina. Now you probably noticed, once you went through the whole DVD, that there was a lot of repeated terms and many different similarities within the animals. In order to make sure you have the correct terminology, you can always consult your livestock judging manual, which is publication number 427.
When you look at a beef animal, you have his head, his poll. This is the brisket, the shoulder. Behind the shoulder is the heart girth. Here you have the rib of the animal, the forerib. You have the hip, the tail head, the hook bones and the pin bones. This is the hind quarter, the lower hind quarter, the back legs, the flank, the twist. This is the loin of the animal. We're going to look at market steers, and the point of a market steer, this isn't a breeding animal, this is an animal that is intended to go into the consumer food chain. So when looking at this animal, the primary concern is in terms of meat and in terms of muscling. We're going to start this steer. We're going to start at the back. If you look at this steer, or any steer, you want to have a steer that has an ample amount of hip. And when I say hip, you want them to be wide-hipped. You want them to have muscle. You want them to carry their muscle down, over their hip and down into their lower quarter, down into the top of their leg. If you look at this steer, he has an ample amount of muscle. He's not an overly heavily muscled steer. He could stand to have more muscle in his lower quarter, but still he's a steer that has some hip to him and he has some muscle and some muscle shape. And when I say muscle shape, you don't want an animal to be flat muscled. If they're flat muscled, they'll start to become tighter in through their lower quarter into the top of their leg. So you want an animal with some muscle shape. When you stand behind them and look over their hip, you want an animal, again, to have some width over their hip. You want it to have some shape. When you stand back and analyze a steer, next you move forward and you look at their rib. You go from their hip, you look in through their rib. On a market steer, what you want to look for fat covering. The fat is what adds to value for when the steer is, when you're looking at the carcass of the steer. Fat leads to marbling, and marbling leads to a higher yield or a higher grade and more profit for a producer of cattle. If you're judging market steers, if you run your hands along their ribs in through their forerib, you can feel the fat covering. A steer, if you can feel their ribs, chances are they don't have enough covering. They're not going to have a high enough marbling. They're not going to catch a grade. If you feel down in their flank, again, you can feel how much fat they have and how much fat cover they have. This steer has an ample amount of fat cover, borderline on almost too much, but still he's a steer that has a lot of fat cover, and when he enters the food chain, when he is slaughtered, he has enough fat that he'll catch a grade. You look at this steer, you want him to have rib, you want him to have spring of rib. When I say spring of rib, you want them to be full. When you look at from their hip up to their shoulder, you want them to be full. This steer, He has spring of rib. He could stand to have more. He could stand to have more strength in through here and into his heart girth. But still, he's a steer that he has an ample amount of rib. He does have a lot of depth of rib. When I say depth of rib, you look, he's got a deep rib. He's a deep-sided steer. If you look right here is the flank. He's deep flanked. You look, he carries himself well down into the flank. When you look at him from a profile standpoint, when you look at him from the side, he's a very deep-sided steer. He's a steer with a lot of body and a lot of dimension to him. You want a steer to have rib shape, as well as spring of rib. You want him to have some shape. You don't want him to be a flat-sided animal. You want the animal to have shape. Again, this steer, he does have some rib shape and an ample amount at that. With a carcass animal, feet and legs soundness, it's not as important as with a breeding animal, but still you want something that you'd like to look at. When you look at this steer, how he stands on his front legs, he turns out a little bit. His feet tend to point outwards. Ideally, they would not be like that. He'd stand straight on his front legs, and he wouldn't turn out. This is not, in a market animal, not so much as a fault as it would be a purebred animal. This animal doesn't need to be bred for longevity like a purebred animal, but it's still something that you want to worry about. And when you're judging steers, it's something that can separate one steer from another. So again, you look at him and the way he is on his front legs, and that's one of the weaknesses of this steer. If you look at him on his back legs, he has a better back leg. He has some set, but doesn't have too much set, but his legs are still not too straight. With a steer, you like a steer that has lots of bone. When I say bone, you mean strength of the leg, size of their leg. An animal that has lots of bone, they're able to carry themselves better, and in feedlot conditions, they hold up a lot better. Again, looking at this steer, a market steer that you're showing, another thing you look at is the attractiveness of the animal. You want an animal that has some attractiveness. When you look at this steer, that's one of his better points. He's a very attractive animal. Judging carcass steers, obviously attractiveness maybe doesn't come into play as much, but when you're judging show steers or show animals, attractiveness is something that you'd like to look at. Looking at the steer over the top, you look at him and you look at the width that he has over his rib. You want him to be wide. You look over his hip. Again, you'd like to have that width. You look at him, you can see better. It illustrates the muscle shape. Ideally, this steer could have a bit more muscle in his lower quarter and a bit more muscle shape. But if you look at him, he still has an ample amount of shape to him. You can also see that this steer carries himself well down into his twist. That's right here. This steer, some steers tend to cut up in here. They maybe don't have as much muscle there, but this steer carries himself down well. He carries his muscling down into his twist. If you look over his top, you can see that this steer does have an ample amount of rib and rib shape. He maybe does not have as much spring of rib as some other steers. He maybe becomes a little bit piecey, but still he's a steer that he has an ample amount of rib. When you stand behind him, he has some width over his top and he's got some rib shape. When comparing these two animals, the strengths of one against the other, this steer, he's probably a deeper sided steer. He's got more lower third. When you look at him, he's got a bit more depth of rib and a bit more depth of body than compared to this steer. When you analyze them, when you stand back and analyze them, this steer just has a bit more depth. He carries it up better into his chest floor as well as into his flank. He's a deeper steer the whole way through. When you stand behind these two steers, this steer probably has a bit more rib, a bit more width over his top, but you'll see that this steer has more spring of rib. He's fuller in from his hip up to his shoulder. He's fuller. He's a steer that has more spring of rib and more strength over his top. The other steer maybe has a bit more width of top, but he just doesn't hold himself together as well as the steer in the front. When you look at these steers, because they're market steers, when you look at the fat covering they have, you have to be able to obviously see the animal, touch the animal. Analyzing these two steers, this steer has more fat covering on it than that steer does. And you can tell that simply by putting your hands on them. You can feel when an animal has more fat. This steer has more fat covering than the other steer. Both steers have an ample amount of cover, but this steer still has more. When you look at these steers structurally, this steer, he turns out on his front feet. You'd like to see him stand a bit better on his front feet. When you look at this steer, and when you look at him in his shoulder, he's a little bit straighter in his shoulder. You'd like to see him maybe not as straight. Maybe you'd like to see him have a bit more length through his front end as compared to that steer. When you analyze these two steers from behind, You look at them. This steer maybe has a bit more length of body, which again is something that's very important with steers. You want them to have that extra length. When you stand behind them, you see that this steer maybe carries his muscling down better into his lower quarter. He has a bit more muscle and a bit more muscle shape as opposed to this steer. This steer has a wide top, but you see he doesn't have the muscle in his lower quarter. You also notice that this steer, he carries his muscling down better into his twist than what this steer does. This steer cuts up a bit more. He just doesn't have the complete quarter like this steer does. When you look at him over the top, this steer, he has a lot of spring of rib. He's a wide top steer. This steer probably has more rib shape. He's a bit deeper rib steer. This steer, he's just a little bit stronger over his top as compared to this steer. If I were judging these steers in a class, I'd place this steer over this steer due to the fact that he's got a bit more muscle, a bit more natural muscle and muscle shape. This steer has a bit more rib shape than what this steer does, and just maybe a bit more overall body mass. This steer is stronger than this steer in terms of the spring of rib that he has, in terms of how he holds up over his top. He just doesn't have that depth of body, that depth in through his chest floor and into his flank. He just doesn't carry his muscling down as well into his lower quarter to compete with the black steer. So for those reasons, I would place the black steer first and this steer second. The first thing would be the thickness over their top, the width of top, the amount of rib they have, their spring of rib, and their rib shape and their depth of rib. That would be the first. The second would be their muscle shape, how much muscle they have, how well they carry it down into their lower quarter, and just the over amount of muscle mass. The third would probably be depth of body. When you're looking at a steer, you want them to be deep-sided. A steer that's deep-sided is obviously at quite an advantage over a steer that is not, as well as the length of body. Those are the most important things to look for when you're judging market steers. What these are breeding females, and they're called heifers. These heifers were born in January of this year, so that makes them 7 months old at this time. And so in 5 or 6 months' time they'll be bred, and in another year, 9 months after that, they'll have their first calf. So these are breeding females. So with a breeding female, the main thing you want to worry about is longevity. And what contributes to longevity, first off, starts with their feet and their legs. You want females that are sound, females that are able to move, and females that over time they won't break down. Looking at this heifer calf, first you look at her feet. Start her feet. You want them to have a good foot underneath them. You want them to have some bone, and when you say bone, you're talking about the strength of their leg. You don't want them to have too much set to their leg, nor do you want them to be too straight-legged. If you look at this heifer, she's got an ample amount of bone, and if you look at the set to her leg, she's got enough set, but she's not too post-legged. Now, the next thing you worry about with females is in time they're going to be having a calf. Now, when she's having a calf, what you would like is you want some width. Right here is her hook bone, right here is her pin bone. You would like length from her hook bone to her pin bone, but at the same time when you stand behind her, you'd like to have width across her pin bones. When it comes time for this heifer to calve, you'd like her to have width, so it makes for easier calving, which will in turn lead to increased longevity for a female, calving ease and things like that. Now looking further up in the female, you like to have, in any type of cattle, females, steers or bulls, you want them to have a lot of rib. Now if you look over here, this is the rib. You want them to have depth of rib, but you also want them to be full through here, which is called their spring of rib. If you look at this female, she's got a lot of spring of rib. She's full in through here, into her forerib, and into her shoulder. Now with a female, like any cattle, you like length of body. If you look at length of body from her shoulder back to her hook bones to her pin bones, this is a very long-made female. Another thing to look for in breeding females, you want depth of body. And when you say depth of body, you mean the depth of rib and the depth of body. A female that has more depth of body is a female, again, more capacity for carrying a calf. And again, it leads to longevity down the road. She's better able to calve. She's better able to catch and stay in calf. As well, for a female, you like them to be smooth-shouldered. You don't want them to be masculine or bold-shouldered. If you look at this female, she's very smooth-shouldered. She has a nice long neck. Neck extension is what you would call that. And she carries herself well into a nice head. For a female, you'd like them to be, again, feminine looking. If you look at this female, she's very feminine. She's not waisty through her front end, and just a very feminine looking female. As well, with females, steers, bulls, any type of cattle, you look for cattle that are easy fleshing. Fleshing ability is the ability to carry fat, to put on weight. You look at this female, she's an easy fleshing female. She's got some flesh to her. Again, just a good solid heifer calf. The strengths of a female like this, first off, would be her length of body. She's a very long-sided heifer. Her next strength would probably be the femininity that she has, how clean and how nice she is through her front end. As well, another strength of this heifer is the width that she has through her pin bones and the width she has over her hip. When comparing these two females in a profile view, which is looking at them from the side, if you look at this female and if you look at her rib, she maybe has more depth of rib in terms like she is deeper and deeper sided compared to what this female is. When you stand back and analyze them, this heifer from her top to her bottom, she's deeper. She's got more rib and more depth of rib. If you look at this heifer, if you look at her front end, this heifer has a smoother front end. She's got a more feminine front end, and she carries herself a lot better through her front end than this heifer does. If you look at this heifer, she's a little bit more coarse through her shoulder. She's a little bit more wasteful through her front end. She's still a feminine female, but she doesn't excel in her femininity like this female does. When you look at them in terms of length, both of them are long-bodied females. Both of them have an ample amount of length to them. When analyzing these females side by side, again we can see what I talked about earlier. If you look at the females in terms of their rib and the width that they have over their top, you see that this female maybe has a bit more of rib and a bit more rib shape than what this female does. If you look at the width they have over their hip and from their hook bones to their pin bones, you see that maybe this female has a little bit more width across her hook bones and maybe a little bit more width across her hip. If you look at the muscle that this female has, the muscle shape that she has, you see that this female has a bit more muscle shape. She carries her muscling down a little bit further into her lower quarter and down into her leg. You can also see when standing behind them, the cleaner fronted female is this female. You can see when you stand behind them that she's smoother shouldered, that she has a smoother front end, and that she's a more feminine female. When you stand behind them, you can see that this female is a little bit coarser in through her shoulder and up through her neck. So in judging females, just to recap, first thing you want to look for, you want to look at their feet, you want to look at their legs. Both of these females are sound females. Both of these females have good legs underneath them. They both have a good foot. The next thing you want to look at, you want to look for that width across their hip. You want length from their hook bones to their pin bones and some width across their pin bones. You want females that have some rib and some capacity and some depth of body and some dimension to them, or rib shape. You want females that have smooth front ends. You want females that have a nice feminine look to them and that carry themselves well through their front end. If we were placing these two females in a class, I'd place this female first, this female second. I'd place this female over this female just on account of the extra rib that she has, the extra body mass that she has, and the extra muscling she has. This female is the more feminine female, but at this point in time, she just doesn't have the development that this female does, and she just doesn't carry that extra capacity and that extra dimension, but still two very strong females.
This is my cow. First thing I would do if I was judging a dairy cow is stand back and have a good look at her from her head right to her tail. If you get up too close, you can't see her whole body. That way you can see how she smooths, she blends, how she tracks on her legs from a long distance away. You can also compare her to the other animals that are in the class by standing further back and having a look. Then I would move in a little closer and take a closer look at the animal. You can start up by her head. You want her to be clean under her jaw. You don't want excess throat or anything like that. A dairy cow, we want them to be real sleek and feminine looking and not carrying any extra condition, because that usually means they don't milk hard enough, and the whole idea of having a dairy cow is we want them to milk. You want them to have a nice clean neck, a long neck. You don't want it to be too short. You want them to blend smoothly from their shoulder through the withers here, in through here. In through her crops here. You don't want to have a big gully or gap, or you want them to blend smoothly in through here. You want them to be deep enough through their chest here. See how she stands here? You got enough width in between her front legs. We want enough width to have a big heart in there so she can pump a lot of blood through her body and make a lot of milk for us. You also want some width through her muzzle. We don't want them too narrow. And then if we keep going on, we want them to have a good abundance of rib, depth, and also spring wide. Like if I stand out behind her, I want to see a big spring of rib, nice and wide. And if you stand beside, you want to see good depth, both in the fore rib and in the rear rib. Mammary blends smoothly into her body wall, and that's right off of her rib. If this cow has no rib, well, she's probably not going to have as snug of a fore udder attachment, because it just her udder would have to be too small to mount onto her body wall. We want this to be smooth. We don't want it cupped up, or we don't want to see any gap in here. We want it to be very snug. We want to see lots of veining like she has on her mammary. It shows that she has good quality in her mammary. Moving on, you want her to be hard across the top line, level, and level across the rump. We want to see a slight slope from her hips to her pins. The wider the pins, the better, because it transfers down into the width of her rear udder. So you want it to be a nice wide rump, and generally the rear udder will be as wide as her rump is. And if we go down, we want a deep median suspensory all the way to the top of her udder and all the way through the bottom of her fore udder attachment. We also want to see the teat placement straight down or slightly pointed inwards. We don't want to see them pointed out. If we look at her feet and legs here, another thing that's really important on a dairy cow is we want to see flat bone in her leg. We don't want to see coarse. We also don't want to see too much bone in her leg. We want them to be nice and fine and refined and smoothly boned. We also want to see her straight and standing upright on her feet and legs. If you were to draw a line from her pin to her hock to her dew claw, that's a perfect set to her leg. You want to be able to draw a straight line from there to there. So we don't want to see a leg too far forward or too straight up, because otherwise they get puffy through their hock. Or if they're too far forward, they wear their feet down too bad and they have a hard time walking for a long period of time. Dairy character starts in the head and neck, but goes right through the whole body. Even the feet, like even when I was explaining the bone quality in her leg, that all goes back to dairy character. A lot has to do with in her head, in her neck, through her brisket. If it's all clean, this cow shows a lot of dairy character. She's really refined through her head and neck. She has clean underneath her throat, and it kind of just transforms all the way along. She's not carrying too much condition in her thigh. We don't want to see too much condition on their thigh. You want to be able to see her vertebrae in the back here. You also want to be able to see a sharp chine on a dairy cow. If I stand behind this cow, you want to see a nice chiseled look at her chine, and that just shows that she's putting all of her energy into making milk. Usually the cow that has the best udder is going to win, unless she's completely awful everywhere else. If I was judging just these two cows and comparing what I would like to see on both of them, first I would stand back and look at both of them and see some positives of each of them and some negatives. This cow here is a little taller, maybe a little longer from the tip of her nose to the tip of her tail, but lacks mammary compared to this cow. I would place this cow over this cow, large part due to her mammary. If you look at this cow's mammary, she blends smoothly into her belly wall. She has nice venation on her forudder and on her rear udder. She has more depth of chest for her size cow. She's a little smoother over her rump, and also she's wider through her pins and wider through her chest, and that carries right through on a cow. This cow here is narrow in her chest, so it generally carries right through to the width of her pins and then the width of her rear udder. Width fairly similar for these two cows, and you can use your hand if you're judging and stretch it across. If you're looking to see if someone's the same width or not, you can use that kind of as your measuring tape. This cow is a lot leveler over this rump. She's a little high in her pelvis here, and then kind of drops down into her rump. Not a huge fault, but if you're comparing one cow to another, it just looks more, well, it's more the way it's supposed to be, is nice and level. They both have a good slope from hooks to pins. You can see this cow is a bit narrow in her, if you let her, she stands more narrow in her front end, in her chest. This cow stands wider, so she has more width to chest. And this cow is also bigger around in her chest here and deeper of her chest comparative to this cow, which is narrower in the front and also narrow in through here. So that would be an advantage to this cow in her depth. Even though this cow is nice and clean and dairy through her head and neck, just like that one, once you get to the chest, that would be an advantage for that cow in comparing. Just on comparing forerudders, this cow is deep and kind of fleshy, and her forudder isn't as snugly attached to her belly wall as this cow. We criticize this cow on having too much udder for her age, and also for being loosely attached both fore and rear. You can see how this cow is a lot higher in her rear udder attachment and also wider at the very top. This cow is fairly high, but not quite as wide at the very top of her rear udder. Also, just being more depth. On a Holstein cow, we want to see their mammary stay above their hock. If it's below their hock, it's quite a discrimination. And this cow, for being a young cow, her mammary is right at her hock level already. These are third calf cows, so we'd still want to see their udder up and well attached onto their body wall. This cow here is standing more straight up on her rear legs. This cow slightly hocks in a little bit. So this cow would have an advantage in the way she's standing on her rear legs than this cow here. And this cow here is a little bit straight in her leg. And you can see in her foot here, she's very straight up on her feet and legs. So this cow would have an advantage over this cow and also in her feet and legs.
If you were judging a class of heifers, how would you judge them differently than milking cows?
There's no real difference on judging a heifer over a cow. It's just you don't have 40 points to the mammary to look at. You just have to go with identically everything else you would look at on a cow, you'd look at on a heifer. You just don't get to compare mammaries.
Would you judge the developing udder on a heifer cow?
You can't really tell where it's going to be or how it's. I mean, some guys can say, you know, maybe she looks good underneath, but it's not something you'd probably want to judge for. Because one thing more with the udder is even if you're judging a springer, like a heifer that's bagging up, it's really hard to tell how her udder is going to turn out. Like it's not until she actually calves, it's really hard. Like some look really good, and then once they calve, they go real bad, and some look really bad before they calve, and they calve in, and it's a nice udder. So it's yeah, it's just something that you probably should just stay away from until they're a milking cow.
What are the most important features to focus on when judging a class?
Well, on a cow, mammary, her udder, her feet and legs, and if you stand back and she has lots of dairy character right through her head, right through her whole body, those would be the three things I'd worry about the most.
We'll start with the face. This is her forehead in here, her eyes, and it's important for a riding horse or any kind of horse. It's very attractive if they have wide set eyes, very feminine like hers. This is her muzzle here. This is the top of her lip and her lower lip. This is her jaw, her ears, and her poll. Her poll's right here. Her crest is right here. It's important that they don't get too cresty. Sometimes a horse's crest will come up like this, and that means that they're like getting fed too much. It's just a really undesirable trait. It's not good to look at either. This is her neck, and it goes into her shoulder, and it's supposed to be nice and smooth. Her chest, her forearm, her knee, cannon bone, pastern, cornet band, and hoof. Her neck goes into her wither, very nice and smoothly. This is the point of her wither, this is her wither. Her back, her loin, and her hips, right here, and her rump. This is her tail head, or her tail, and her gaskin muscle, her hock, cannon bone, pastern, and hoof, and hornet band. This is her flank, and this is her stifle. This is her abdomen, and it's important for riding horses to have a well-sprung rib so that they can get a lot of oxygen and be able to breathe easily. If their ribs are really tight and compact, they don't have a lot of endurance. Okay, this is the croup in here. Point to the hip. This is her barrel. Right in here is her heart girth, and it's important in a riding horse that they don't have a tight heart girth because that could restrict their breathing and would affect their endurance. So she has a very good heart girth. It's not too tight at all. And this is her throat latch in here. Okay, I would place this bay horse over this chestnut horse because the bay horse, first of all, is very easy on the eyes. She's an eye catcher right away. She is very well balanced, uniform horse. She's just very smooth throughout, an attractive feminine mare. It doesn't riding horse. She has a shorter back than this horse here, so which means that she'll have a stronger top line and can be a smoother ride and will travel more correctly. She has a better sloping shoulder than this horse here. Its shoulder's a little steep, which means that it can be a rougher ride. She has a lot more natural muscle pattern. You can see she bulges in here, and especially in her gaskin. Whereas this horse is kind of just smooth, and you don't want that. You want like the natural bulgy muscling. This horse also stands very square underneath herself. And when a horse stands square naturally, that means that it's well balanced. And that's a good indication that the horse has good conformation. So a horse's legs should stand squarely from the point of the shoulders straight down, and same from the point of the hips straight back. This horse is base narrow because when you look at the point of the shoulder and draw a line straight down, her feet fall in between, so which means that she's base narrow. She's also a little toed out on the front. When you look at her straight on, her toes stand a little out. And she's a little cowpoxed on the back. You can see that this horse stands with its hocks facing each other and the hooves are pointed outwards compared to this horse, who stands square underneath itself. You can draw a line right from here down, straight down. Whereas this horse, you draw a line straight from here and her hocks are in and her feet are pointed outwards. That's undesirable. It means that her legs are weaker. Like you can see from behind that she carries her muscle straight down into her hocks, which makes them very powerful stopping and going and turning. Whereas this horse has quite a thick butt, but it doesn't have like any true muscle to it or muscle pattern. So it's thicker, but it falls short in this area. It's not very thick. Now from their side profiles, you can see the sloping shoulder of this mare better than the sloping shoulder on that mare. It's a lot more desirable and correct. Their top line, this mare has a lot stronger of a top line because her back is shorter and she has a nicer place set with her that flows nicely from her neck into her back. You can see here there's no like stop, it's very smooth. And whereas this mare, she's a little choppy coming into here and her back's a lot longer. So that means that her back is not as strong and she might not travel as nicely or correctly. This mare also doesn't have as much volume through in here as this mare does. And you can see very easily that this mare has a lot of muscle pattern, which is very desirable. Also about the necks, you can see how this mare's neck is set lower, which is very, very good trait. That means that she could be a lot more calmer of a horse and that she'll travel a lot easier and more relaxed she doesn't have a bulging muscle in here like this mare does here. You can see that her neck bulges here. It's called a gooseneck. And that's undesirable because it shows that she's often alert. And so she built up muscle here. And you don't really want an alert riding horse with its head up because that also makes its back sway. And so it will weaken its back and it will travel a lot rougher when its head's up like this. And you can see that hers is often up because she has this built up muscle here. Her head's a little longer in comparison to this horse, and the shorter, more feminine head is a lot more desirable. You can see her head's a lot shorter. Also on this mare, her tail set is higher, and when she walks, which when we're looking at after, you'll notice that she likes to travel with her tail up like that, which is also undesirable because it shows that she is a little more high-strung and travels, like it's the same idea with her neck, that they're often alert and looking around and maybe like on edge. Whereas this mare's tail is a low-set tail, and you can tell that she's just relaxed. And when a horse's head and tail is up, it shows that they are not relaxed, and that's not what you want in a riding horse. You want a nice, pleasurable ride in a riding horse. When you're looking at a riding horse, when they're traveling, you want a horse that travels straight and the feet fall one right after another in a straight line. You just watch their feet track, and you will see that her feet fall one right after another in a straight line. There's no winging or paddling. Her feet aren't going out when she walks, or they're not coming in when she walks. No. She's not clipping her feet when she walks, so she's not overreaching and she's not underreaching. You'll know if they're overreaching if you hear them clicking their feet together, their back feet with the front feet. And you watch when she walks forward you that her knees and her feet are falling straight, and same with her back feet. Watch their hooves and make sure that they're not turning in the sand, like that their feet doesn't place and then turn. You can trot her away now. And then you watch them trot. You watch their foot placement and make sure it's straight in line. You watch and make sure that there's no lameness issues and that they look like a smooth, easy ride. And same as when they're trotting toward you. You watch their foot placement, watch how they travel, see if there's any problems, lameness issues, and their smoothness of gait. This mare travel is a good example of a nice traveling riding horse. I think that she's almost ideal for what you'll be looking for in a foot placement and traveling of a riding horse. Now when I'm watching this mare travel, I see that her back legs are almost hitting each other. She's stepping close because she's a little cowhawk, so the insides of her hooves are almost hitting. And her front feet I see are placing outwards, like she's paddling out a bit. And same as she's walking forward, you can see that she's toed out. And you want to make sure to watch for stuff like that, their foot placement, because that could indicate future lameness issues. Okay, you can trot. When she trots, you can see she's a little choppier of a ride and her head goes up, which causes her back to sway, which means that she's going to be a little bouncier and not as comfy. As well as when she trots, she's toed out. So for those reasons, that's another reason why the bay mare would get placed over this mare, is because this mare's a little choppier going, her head is raised, and her toes are placed outwards, and her hocks are cow hocks, as well as her tail set is too high. For those reasons, I would place this mare over that mare. She just wants to get away from you. I trotted my number 2 horse just to make sure that all the viewers can see that her foot placement is off. She's toed out and cowhawked when she travels. And that her head goes up and her tail set is high, all very undesirable traits in a riding horse. Okay, so in a judging class you have 20 minutes. And you walk up to these horses and you have 20 minutes to decide who's first, who's fourth. Which isn't very much time, that's including the trotting time. The first thing you want to look at is overall appearance. Which horse down the line do you think is the most attractive? And I picked this mare. She caught my eye. Then I look at her and I analyze everything about her. Why should she be first place? I look at their overall smoothness and proportion of body, the strength in the legs and correctness of the legs, and the top line, and the attractiveness of the head, and characteristics that would show me that she's a pleasant riding horse, like a lower tail set and a lower head set, and no muscling underneath. And I'd look for soundness, definitely in a riding horse. Make sure that they're sound, they travel true, that they have good, strong feet like this mare, no cracks or blemishes.
Llamas can be used for different purposes and may have specific breed characteristics. Today we look at 2 Surrey fiber llamas, but we'll also go over the main characteristics to look for in all llamas. First, let's review the parts of the llama. Starting with the head, there's the nose, jaw, throat, and poll. This carries into the neck, the withers, shoulder, and chest. Over the top line is the back, croup, tail, and tail set. From here we move down to the hip, thigh, and the stifle. For the front legs, there is the knee, the cannon, pastern, and toe with toenail. The hind legs have the hock joint, then the cannon and pastern. What are the desirable characteristics for the conformation of a llama? For the head area, the eyes should be well placed, clear and bright. Ears should be long, erect, and the shape resembling a banana shape, although different breeds have different ear characteristics. The ears should look like a matched set, not crooked, or one forward, one back. If the llama will allow it, check the bite of the llama by sticking your fingers in the mouth and running your finger over the teeth and palate. Llamas have an upper palate and lower teeth, and these should line up evenly. You don't want an underbite or an overbite. The teeth should be even and not too worn down.
Lift the lip. If you're concerned about it, would you lift the lip and make sure that their pad and their teeth bite.
Top teeth are jutting out, they don't have any.
They don't have any top teeth, so if that's flush, that's fine. He has a big pouty lip, this one.
The neck of an alert llama rises up smoothly from the withers. The neck should be about 2/3 the length of the back, and should blend into the chest, with the chest moderately broad and deep. Keep in mind that the chest should be in proportion to the rest of the body. When seen in profile, the whole body should appear balanced and smooth. This means that the back is not too long and out of balance with the neck and legs. The top line should be level, flat, and straight. The loin should be strong, with a level transition to the croup. For the tail set, the tail should drop off the top of a level top line, but not too far up or too low down on the back. A tail that's set too low gives the appearance of a rounded rump, something you don't want in a llama. The tail should be straight, of sufficient length, and not crooked to either side. Moving down to the legs, we're looking for substance and strength. The forelegs should be straight and set squarely from the front and side viewpoints. From the front, make sure the legs are straight and the knees are not causing the llama to toe in or toe out. Hind leg profile should display correct angles through the hip, to stifle, to hock, and down to the fetlock. From a rear view, the thighs and gaskins should be strong and well muscled. There should be a straight line from the hip down to the fetlock. On both front and hind legs, strong pasterns are indicated by being upright and not dropped. The toes should point forward, not in or out, and there should be 2 toes on each foot. For breeding animals, genitalia are important. Intact males shown today should have both testicles visible, uniform in size, and having proper placement. The color and type of fiber will depend on the breed of llama and what it's used for. These llamas are suri fiber, meaning the fiber is silky and fine. The fiber should be drapey and lie flat on the sides. For suri registration, fiber needs to be consistent throughout the whole length of the animal.
When they cure the Surrey llamas for the Surrey registration, they have to have a consistency throughout their whole length of the animal, and that's how they grade them. Some are probably, this guy, he wouldn't get as good a grade because it's not locked to the skin, where his locks right to the skin, and they're little fine locks. There's different kind of locks, and this is the lock structure that we like. There's a flat lock, there's a twisted lock, but we like the flat lock because it shows a very strong Surrey that's slab-sided, parted in the middle, right up the neck.
It's important to see how the llama moves, as they do carry a lot of fiber that may hide a major flaw. From the rear and the front, you are looking for a straight gait with no winging or swinging of the legs, proper foot placement with the llama tracking up easily, and a fluid, non-restrictive gait. From the side, the top line remains moderately level and smooth, with no excessive head or tail movement. There's proper extension of the feet, with no over or under reaching, and the pasterns show strength and flexion.
This guy has a little swing, but nothing too drastic. It's more, I think a lot of it is that I see, I've got to be very careful when I'm judging them, is that Surrey fiber swings when they walk, and so you've got to try and see the bone structure rather than the fiber. And with this guy, he's got so much fiber, all this just flops around like that, and he looks like he's swinging, but he's not too bad.
Above all, llamas should have a quiet disposition and a natural presence. The quietness and trainability is particularly important with llamas that are to be used as pack animals. It can be difficult to assess the llama's weight and fitness due to the abundant fiber on the llama's body. Here's how to check for overall conditioning if you're able to touch the animal. 1. Feel the ribs. It is normal to be able to feel the ribs easily through the fiber, but not too much, as this could be an indicator of being underweight. If you can't feel the ribs, your llama is too fat. 2. Check the inner thighs from the hind. The inner thighs are bare of fiber and easy to see. If they jiggle when your llama walks, it is too fat. 3. Check the chest from the front. The breastbone should be easily felt and seen between the front legs. If no bone can be felt and the chest is the consistency of jello, your llama is overconditioned. 4. Feel across the back of your llama just behind the withers. If it feels well padded and not bony, your llama is too fat. Conversely, if all you can feel is bones across the back, your animal may be underweight. Now let's compare two llamas. Today, I would place the black one over the white one. He's more proportionate throughout the body with a straighter top line. The black one moves out straighter and smoother than the white one. The black llama has hooked, banana-shaped ears, whereas the white one has straighter ears. For Surrey fiber characteristics, the black one's locks are more consistent from the head and neck to the tail, and the locks are finer and lie right to the skin. The one fault on the black one is that he's knock-kneed, but he may grow out of that. The white one is sickle-hocked, which causes him to swing out in the back end when he moves. His top line has a slight dip in the back, and he's a little too low on his withers. The fiber on the white one is not locked to the skin. I do grant that the white one displays a correct tail set that just drops a little and then comes right up. For these reasons, I place these yearling male llamas black over white.